we do have to talk a little bit about the football game. And the football game, we did make the trip down to Towson, and Johnny Wincott and Jeff Bernstein brought us the action there. But yet another loss for the Seawolves, even though they had a couple of good individual performances in the game, topped by Towson. And, we'll get into it because the season with the Seawolves now at 1-5 and 0-3 in the conference is slowly but surely getting out of control, losing by a touchdown yet again, 21-14. And what was your take on the action? As we did have, Tyson Lawton did get 2 rushing touchdowns, 119 yards, did everything right. Punching in a pair of scores from 1 yard and 41 yards out, but still.
Hey, man, it is tough to talk about football, especially New York football, as we saw in the pros today and Stony Brook yesterday. I mean, we're starting to get like a broken record. I'm pretty sure I said this last week as well, is that you look on paper, don't look at the score, just look at the stats, where Stony Brook's leading in total yards, total passing, rushing, first downs. You look on paper and you expect Stony Brook to dominate this game against Towson. And you look at the final score, it's 21-14 to the Tigers. And it's like, what is going on? And things got to change. Got to change fast. As you said, they're 1-5 overall, still winless in the CAA. The last time they were 1-5 was 2008, and that was an abysmal season, as you remember, Matt.
Mm-hmm. But that was a long, long time ago. This has been definitely the worst season that the Seawolves have had so far under Coach Chuck Priori. And we wrote off last year, and we wrote off the year before when they lost 4 straight to end the season. We kind of wrote that off too. But we didn't expect the trend to continue, and that's what's happening right now. They did put together, like we did. We said they had some positives, okay? But still,
I think that's the thing, too, is just, again, one reason in particular we'll focus on is, as we said, the offense. Yeah, Tyson Lawton in particular had a great game, another 100-plus yard showcase, 2 rushing touchdowns, 119 yards in total on the ground. But at the same time, it's getting to the point where all of that becomes moot when the Seawolves, A, don't get the win, and B, it's pretty evident that the rest of the league just kind of figure out the game plan going in of, hey, it's called ground chuck offense for a reason. We're going to defend against the run. And, sure, Lawton can beat us up, but he's not going to do enough damage to where the Seawolves are going to pull away from this thing. Every game has been close. Well, most games have been close for the Seawolves this season, especially in conference play. And the reason is because, the team just can't get it done in the end zone without Lawton. He was responsible for both touchdowns today. The receivers, Fields, I thought, had a better game than usual. Went 20 for 33, 220 passing yards. Great 50-yard dot to Sean Harris in the third quarter. Doesn't end up mattering because they can't score over the air.
Well, most importantly, they can't balance their offense because when you have the running game working so well, you at least have to have, like we said, a quarterback who takes care of the ball. We talked about this last week, about a lot of guys that you see who may not make the Hall of Fame, but led their teams to Super Bowl victories simply because they, 1, didn't make too many mistakes, and 2, kept the offense on the field. We talked about Sims and Hostetler with the Giants from that era. And even to an extent, Eli Manning did the same thing. And now, will Eli make the Hall of Fame? I think he will. But there was always that little, peanut gallery in the background saying, well, he's not quite as good as, insert name here. He's not Tom Brady, even though he beat him twice. Whatever. The bottom line was he fit in with the team's game plan, which was to rely primarily on the defense. The other problem that the Seawolves have is that if you have an offense like that can only generate so many points and can eat up clock and eat up yardage and take care of the ball, you got to have a defense that stops the other side. And that's another problem the Seawolves have been dealing with.
Yeah, that's been a big issue. You spoke about it last month where you felt like this team had depth. And defensively, while there are a lot of players, do fill in a lot of positions, I really don't see many outside of 1 or 2. Really, to me in particular, Tyler King had 11 tackles today. He was a redshirt freshman linebacker. outside of him, I really don't see anyone that really stands out on this defense. And even in the past couple of years, as the team maybe underperformed, that you still had guys who would deliver week in and week out defensively. Gavin Heslop, Sam Kamara, for example, those two in particular. I mean, now it's, it's essentially an open gate. There weren't a lot of drives in the game in particular, especially in that first half, Matt. You remember,
Right.
Both teams essentially grinded down the clock on possession. But as for Stony Brook, when they couldn't convert in Towson territory, the Tigers would respond by going down the field, eating up the clock, and finding the end zone. It really didn't matter where or when they had the ball; they were going to score, especially in that first half. Before Stony Brook got a chance to get the ball again. I mean, you just go back to the third quarter. Stony Brook went down to the Towson 24. That was the opening drive of the third quarter, and Fields ended up losing, or rather running out of bounds way behind the line of scrimmage, and they unfortunately had to punt. And even though they pinned the Tigers to the 6-yard line, Towson marched down the field 94 yards and extended the lead 21-7. I mean, that's just not winning football when you have them backed up against the wall and they still find a way to get past you into the end zone.
Now, everything we said, if you looked at the stats, you're wondering what the hell we're talking about. Because if you take a look at the team passing, total net 220 yards versus 177 for Towson, 20 for 33, 6.7 average yards per attempt, average per completion 11. Okay, no touchdowns, and yet 2 on the other end.
Right.
And then total offense 363 to 293. Everything, all the offensive stats favor the Seawolves. So why did they lose? 25 first downs to 16 overall, 11 rushing, 12 passing to 10, more first downs passing, and we're complaining about the passing. 2 penalties, yes, but that's also a lot less than they've had to deal with in the past.
Yeah, they're averaging about 9 penalties a game. 65 yards was among the leaders, not the leaders. I thought they did much better yesterday compared to on average with the lack of penalties they committed.
Which only proves that you can do everything right and still lose.
Oh, I think it also just proves that this team, just when it comes down to all of that, it comes down really in part to the players, also just the play schemes in general. I mean, there was questionable play calling as well. Just go back to that final drive. They started with 4 minutes on the clock, and they didn't use their first time out until 22 seconds left when they were inside the Towson 30. I mean, you got to give your guys more time than that in order to set up a game-tying drive, rather than milking the clock till 20 seconds when you're down a touchdown. But again, it also, I think, just shows just this team, the talent isn't necessarily there like it was in past seasons, where, again, outside of a guy like Tyson Lawton, it's so much tougher to win because things you would expect, like maybe big plays or catches to come, aren't really happening. Or when they are happening, like in the case of that Sean Harris catch, they went 50 yards, the Seawolves just aren't following up, man. When you don't follow up, when you're in the other team's red zone, you're just not winning the game.
Well, most importantly, you also have the problem with, if you take a look at the rushing, Seba Neket, 6 for 15, Tyquell Fields himself as a quarterback, 10 for 43. Okay, Roland Dempster, you used to have
more option.
You used to have 4. I mean, there was a period of time, thanks to Hofstra dropping football a few years back, you had 4 Hanson winners on the team. Hanson Trophy, of course, everybody knows, top football player in Suffolk County. But we had as many as you could possibly have. And that meant options. That meant Chokolsky or Maisonette. That meant, you never knew who was going to get the ball, but whoever got it got some yardage out of it. So, again, this was an offense that was oriented towards the ground, and yet they were able to produce because, 1, they had a balanced passing attack, and number 2, they were there in the red zone. When they got in the red zone, they got it done. And you could argue,
don't have finishers, man. They just don't have it. And again, you could look. Let's just look at the pass game, for example. Really, Fields only had 3 receivers he turned to. Harris, obviously, Delonte Helms, and Cleo Newton. They only had 4 apiece. How you look at Towson, they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9 different players with a reception on their 22 receptions on the day. again, this is a team where, they're still looking for, I think, that guy over the air in terms of who's going to produce for them, and ultimately, as we've been saying, get them to the end zone, because the teams have been locked down against Stony Brook on the ground for the most part. Obviously, Lon is getting his scores. Fields has kind of been held in check in terms of finding the end zone, both through the air and on the ground, and that's a big factor for why this team is 1-5 this season.
Well, they do have Delaware next week at home, which is...
They're not even ranked, Delaware.
Yeah.
It was close the last time Stony played a ranked team last week or a couple weeks ago, but it's only getting a lot tougher now. This was the quote-unquote light part of the schedule against Towson, but it's not getting any easier.
You know what? I can say this, though, is that right now, where the Seawolves stand, it doesn't matter quite so much what the other team does. It matters what they do. And can you say the Seawolves have been beating themselves? To a degree, yes. When they're not punching it in the red zone, they're definitely beating themselves. When they rack up offensive numbers that are better than their opponents and still losing by a touchdown, that's on them.
Yes.
So that's what they got to work on.
Yeah, and as I said, it really comes down to the talent and discipline of this team, and something obviously they've been working on, but it just hasn't matched to the opposition. And honestly, it's not going to happen when you go up against the top 10 team in the conference like their upcoming game against Delaware. That's a game I don't really feel is going to be particularly close. You have a top 4 defense in the CAA in Delaware in terms of average yards given up, which is about 5, offensively, Delaware is getting also 5 yards, per carry or per play. And, this is the type of game where for the Seawolves, they really do need to find ways to get to the end zone and really capitalize on those scoring possessions and potential scoring drives, because they're not going to get many. And on the ones they fail, Delaware's is going to, if you saw Towson and how they were able to take it from their own 6 and get a touchdown, what do you think Delaware's going to do? They could probably do it from their own 2.
Yeah, and that's going to be a problem for them. And you're right, schedule does not get any easier. It's all CAA, obviously, but you got Richmond for homecoming, which is October 23rd. And then right behind that, you go to Maine and you go to Villanova. And Villanova just beat James Madison on the road.
Yeah. And James Madison ain't no joke, as per usual.
Yeah.
The favorites to win every year. So, again, when they're a team that pull off the upset, that tells me it is not happy trails for Stony Brook. Their playoff chances are quickly fading away. And honestly, I believe that, again, this team, I just think they don't have it. And if they don't figure it out fast, besides the season being over, I question seeing a lot of the guys on the field in big roles. And it sucks to say that, because there are many guys who have a lot of talent, and guys in particular I am a fan of in the sense of watching them play. But at the end of the day, if you're not winners, what are you doing on the field? It's going to be a 3rd straight season with a losing record in CAA play under Coach Priori. Got to question what's going on in the play calling sense too, and what's going on in Sean Helburn's mind, where you have a pretty good football program go 3 straight years losing.
Well, this is one thing. I want to hear some fan reactions. We're back in the studio now, which means that we can take phone calls. Couldn't do that when we were doing the show from my house because I didn't want to give out my home phone number. But we can give out this phone number, 631-632-9872, 631-632-WUSB. Please, 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 please join in on the conversation, because we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to hear your reactions to this current edition of Stony Brook Seawolves football. And the thing that disappoints, I think, most people is that, it was only a couple of years ago this team was in the NCAA tournament, and it's taken a turn for the worse. Now, every now and then, there was a little bit of rumbling about the future of Chuck Priori, and, you have an off year or have an off, few weeks or something like that, and, there'd be a little bit. But you got 2 things going now. Number 1 is that the Seawolves may be looking to upgrade. Not FBS, but I don't think you can upgrade much beyond CAA in FCS. So I don't see that happening. But the rest of their programs, is the pressure going to be on Stony Brook to make a move? And is this just a blip, or is this sustained? Remember, 2020 or slash 2021 last year, complete write-off because they even played the last 2 games because of COVID. But the most important thing here is you don't want this to become the trend. And yes, a turnaround obviously this year would be nice, but again, you don't necessarily see it because you see the team, you see with the Towson game what you have. And I still remember the great Dennis Green line, we are what our record says we are. And you know what? Right now, that's the Seawolves.
Yeah, agreed. And honestly, just getting back, just solely focusing on conference, I really feel kind of there's a lot of similarities between the Seawolves team and the Giants, where you look at them and their records overall. After really those 2012 seasons, these teams have struggled. And again, with the exception, obviously, of 2016 for the Giants, 2017 for the Seawolves, it's taken another, bad turn to where they're struggling again, especially in the CAA. And we're going on almost 4 in the last 5 seasons, Seawolves finishing with a losing conference record, and 3 of the last 4 of a losing record overall. It's not looking good. And as you said, with the programs looking to upgrade, there have been rumors everywhere about that. Of course, Heltbron not directly commenting on it, but hasn't shot down the idea of the Stony Brook programs moving to a conference like the A10, which many of the fan base and our listeners as well have been clamoring for the Seawolves to move to. And with that in mind, it's tough for me to really keep the same personnel when they haven't been producing in CAA competition.
Well,
Priori's contract comes up through the 2022 season, so definitely a lot of questions in terms of if he gets another extension like he did it in 2018 or 2016.